Great seeing you here again. My name is Luc de Custer, founder of the Custer Academy. And in this next video about the Agile Practice Guide, I will talk about the difference between definable work and high uncertainty work. Those are two important definitions that explain in a way why an agile or an adaptive approach is more suitable in certain occasions. Let's have a look at the difference between industrial and knowledge work. Industrial work typically relates to creating a product, a house, a building, a car, and it is in fact something we can touch, and we need a detailed upfront planning. Of course, in certain cases like the house or the car, we may have some uncertainties that will be treated in a different way later on. Now, knowledge work is completely different, and we cannot plan everything up front. So there is some work that we can do, but we cannot do everything. We cannot plan everything up front because we don't have any touchables. We don't have any things that we can see how they build. We can imagine a structure, but we cannot really imagine the totality of the work that we're going to carry out. Now, typically, knowledge work is invisible work, like writing a program, writing a book. These are things that are not touchable. We can touch the book, we can touch the program, but not the program itself, not what it's doing, not what the book is saying to you. Now, knowledge work is typically not stable, and we can expect many changes. Things can be changed because people find out a better way to do things. Just compare this with building a house. You have to know where the foundation has to be, because otherwise it doesn't work. Changing things later on, it's rather difficult, although not impossible. So let's have an example of industrial versus knowledge work. For example, let's have a look at some industrial work, building a house, building a sport hall, building a shopping center. All these are typical examples of industrial work. We can see what we're doing, it's visible, it's touchable. You can see that we put there the foundation, we can see that we did some masonry and we put some floors in there. All these things are visible and touchable and can be planned up front. The design, the building of that, or the construction of that building is a plan-driven approach. We have to plan the things to do them in the right order. We cannot build the foundation after completing the building. We first have to put the foundation there, so we have to know what has to be on top. There are clear standards and norms. A lot of standards have been written for these, how to calculate, what are the loads. All these things have been regulated, and we can use them, and we have to follow them. Performance is easily measured. Work done is easy to identify. Typically in a building at a certain moment, the owner or the customer and the company that's doing the work, they go together, they make a statement of work that has been completed, it can be measured, and an invoice can be sent to pay partially for the work done. So these things are done step by step. Workers typically are considered to be a cost to complete the task. We calculate how much it costs to do the work. So basically, these are the elements specific for industrial work. Now, when we look at this, industrial work doesn't mean that we will not have any changes. It may be when you start doing the work, you find that the soil is not as you expected, and soil and stability is very important. You can do some measurements, you can study the terrain, but there may be local changes that influence your building. You may have to change some things the customers want to change. You find out things that don't really work the way they should. So there will be changes going on. But basically, we have everything really well planned out. Now, knowledge work, for example, writing a program, but it can also be writing a book. If you ever tried writing a book, you will see it's a completely different ballgame. Now, the work is invisible and untouchable. You can touch the physical book, the physical program lines, but you don't touch the knowledge, the content of the book, the content of the program. You cannot touch what the program is doing. It's in fact untouchable. You cannot have it. There is limited structure, although you can have an overview of the program where you want to do the things, but it can change quite easily. Also, a book, you may have an overview of what you want to put in the book, but my experience is when you start writing, you may start changing things. It can go very quickly. You may restart the book because you want to reschedule, restructure the book. You have better ideas. These are typically elements of knowledge work. There are a lot of changes and questions. Just look at the program. You're talking with the people. You ask if it's working well. You can change it if the people don't like it. Same thing with the book. You can give the documents or the text that you wrote to somebody to review and to see what's happening, and they can give comments to the work that you already finished. Value and autonomy driven. You try to make value with the program. You try to solve some problems. You try to share knowledge with your book. So it's basically sharing value. It's autonomic. You do it with a limited group. You can do it even different people separated from each other doing the work, but it's completely different than when you look at the industrial work. It's very difficult to say how is the performance going. You can measure the number of lines that you've been writing, but numbers of lines doesn't mean the quality or the value. You look at innovation. You have a new program. You talk about learning and teaching, like when you make courses. When I'm making these courses, I'm trying to bring some things to the students, and I'm adjusting. I have some general idea, but basically I'm adjusting it to fit in the best way for the people who will be reading it. Now, the workers are an asset, not a cost. We look at the people. They deliver the value. We don't look at them as cost elements, but they are the people creating the value. So they're basically assets and not costs. Let's have a look more at definable work. Definable work typically refers, when we look at the work, things that we have done before. So we've been doing those buildings. We know what to do. We have elements, experiences, lessons learned about the things that we did before. And what we did before, we can use in future projects. Now, we can use that for new smartphones, cars, infrastructure work, all kinds of work. Also, writing programs, we may have certain elements that can be definable work. Definable work itself does not mean that there are no uncertainties. Like I said before, infrastructure projects can have a lot of uncertainties. These uncertainties relate to something that has been done before. Like I said, the stability of the ground. You may see when you start digging that the soil is not what you expected. So you have to adjust some number of things. But these things are typically well known in case of infrastructure works. Now, definable work also refers to best practices based on past experiences. Now, typically when we look at these type of projects, you can consider a more deterministic approach. And we will see later that we will combine a deterministic with adaptive approaches in order to find the best solution. Some things we've done before, we can repeat, we have the experience, but some things will be new. So definable work typically relates to things that we have done before, experiences we have gathered, and we already have lessons learned. We may have some documents that will help us to define the work, to plan the work. On the other hand, high uncertainty work is a little bit different. Here we look at not done before. So there are a lot of unknowns that will be discovered during project execution. Just imagine developing the first smartphone, the first man into space, things like that. These are things which are of high uncertainty and they have not done before. There are a lot of examples like that. You can find them in your own industry, and you will see what is the definition of high uncertainty. You can find it when you say, oh, this we've never done before. Nobody else has done it before. Now we look at software design, specific applications, teaching. People talk about lawyers because they have to go to procedures. Now these are elements that you don't always know. A court case can be very new, can be repeatable. So there are a lot of elements that you can consider here. We also look at problem solving and engineering projects, which are discovering, dealing with things that have not done before. The lack of existing examples, no procedures, best practices. This means that high uncertainty work cannot be managed using the classical deterministic approach, because one of the elements that we will do during discovery is that we may change the requirements and the scope. We will discover new things, and it's highly certain that the requirements and the scope that we defined at the beginning are not really covering what we want to reach. We discover new things we didn't know when we were making or writing the requirements and the scope, and we will have to negotiate with the customer to find how will we adjust requirement and scope to those new things that we discovered. These projects are typically characterized by high changes rates, a lot of changes, risk, and you have to have a method for project management that can help you to change direction very quickly. If you're not able to change direction very quickly, you're bound to jeopardizing the project outcomes, and that's certainly not what we want to do. So that was an overview of knowledge work, industrial work, definable work, and high uncertainty work. Very important to understand these differences because they will determine how will you deal with the project. What will be the way to manage the project? Will we use an adaptive approach or will we use a more classic waterfall approach? So we have to look at these different elements, and it's very important, certainly at the beginning of these chapters about Agile. That was it for this video. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button, click on the bell button, and every time we have a new video, YouTube will inform you about it. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next videos. Bye-bye.